Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language. In today's video, we are going to be focusing on Edexcel English Language GCSE Paper 1 Section A. That is the section that deals with a 19th century unseen extract. Rather than talking you through the whole paper though, I am going to be focusing on question 4 only. This is the whopper, the 15 marker, so it's really important that we get it right. So this video is going to give you some examples, some tips, some acronyms to help you evaluate for question 4. So let's get started. Okay, so what do you need to know for this 15-mark question? Well, first of all, it's assessment objective 4, which is all about evaluation. The question is always relatively similar. It will state that something has been attempted in the extract, and then it will ask you how successfully that has been achieved. So, for example, it might be in this extract, there is an attempt to present a character as lonely, or in this extract there is an attempt to create tension or a mysterious atmosphere. How successfully has this been achieved? So we always know it's evaluate, but we just don't know exactly what it is that they want the focus to be. As I said before, it's worth 15 marks. They want to see coverage of the whole extract. So it's different from question 3, which is given, you're given just a limited little area of the passage. Here, they want to really see you show off what you can do. So you're going to aim for about 4 to 5 different paragraphs. So you might actually think to yourself, well, I'm not 100% certain how evaluation is different from analysis. And it's simply this. So when you evaluate in English, you're making a judgment about a text, about its successes and its weaknesses. Just as if you were having someone come and do an evaluation on your house, it would be looking at the pros and cons and helping you assess its value. Same thing in literature. But I do have a tiny little caveat here. Even though evaluation is about assessing strengths and weaknesses, successes and weaknesses, the texts that they are going to give you in this paper are canonical British texts that have been celebrated for long over 100 years. So the examiners don't necessarily want to hear you say that you just find Jane Austen really dull and boring. So even if you don't find it the most engaging bit of material, just think to yourself, well, what is the writer doing? Because we know these texts are successful because they're 19th century classics. So just avoid the sort of overly negative judgment in your essay. Okay, so how do you show that you are evaluating? It's really simple. It's all about your Pecks. So this is, you've probably heard this, you may have been taught this in class already, but it's a really useful acronym to help you remember the types of words that you need to be using, particularly in your opening statements of each of your paragraphs. So Pecks stands for powerful, effective, compelling, successful. Now you'll notice that at the end of each of these I've given you a little ly in brackets. That's just basically turning it from an adjective into an adverb, powerfully. Okay, so here are 4 evaluative adjectives and adverbs that you can use. Okay, so just a reminder, when you're going into question 4, you could even write Pecks at the top, and that will help you remember that these are the kinds of words, you're not limited to them, but they're the kinds of words that you might want to be using. So writing evaluatively might be all about your Pecks, but you also need to start thinking about, well, how am I going to generate the ideas for the evaluation? How am I going to tackle this extract? And that is where we have this wonderful acronym, which is called SPITE. Not something that I've made up, but a lot of my teacher friends use it. I use it in the classroom. It works really well for both this paper and the second paper as well, paper 2. So SPITE is an acronym, and it's a way of helping you generate a range of different ideas for the text and for your response. So the S of SPITE stands for setting. So the first thing you need to do when you're looking at that extract is you think, okay, what's the setting like? Where are the characters? What's the weather like? What's the time of day? And is it relevant to the topic of the question? The P stands for people. Now, obviously in a fiction context, what we really mean by people is characters, don't we? So we're basically thinking, well, what are the characters like? How do they feel? How do they speak? How do they act? And again, how is it relevant to that topic of the question? This one is perhaps slightly less useful for the fiction and more useful for the non-fiction text, but ideas, sort of what are the ideas behind the text? Like, what are the themes, I suppose, being generated? Personally, I think that one works better for the non-fiction. T stands for tone, which is a really useful little sort of thing to have in your mind. Basically, well, hang on a minute, what's the atmosphere like? How does it feel? How do people sound? A really good way, specifically if you've got a question that's on like tension or mystery. And then E stands for events. What happens? You know, what is actually happening in this extract? So one of the things that I think is quite useful, write spite at the top of your extract, and then as you're reading through, just label with an S or a P or a T or an E every time you see something that you think fits, one, with the topic of the question, but is also a part of the acronym. So we're going to put it to practice momentarily. So this is an example of a question. In this extract, there is an attempt to create tension. How successfully has this been achieved? Now, the extract that we are going to use, again, just like with my question 3 video and my walkthrough, I've not used a past paper. I've just made something up by using an extract of any 19th century text, obviously good ones. The one that we're going to be using is the opening scene from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, where Pip is come upon by a criminal out in the marshes. So what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to read it through. I'll read it aloud to you. The actual extract will show up on the screen in front of you, so you can read it as well. You can obviously pause me and read it thoroughly yourself as well, or just read along with me. And then once we've done a full read through of it, then we'll start thinking about applying spite. So here we go. Ours was the marsh country, down by the river, within, as the river wound, 20 miles of the sea. My first most vivid and broad impression of the identity of things seems to me to have been gained on a memorable raw afternoon towards evening. At such a time I found out for certain that this bleak place overgrown with nettles was the churchyard, and that Philip Pirrip, late of this parish, and also Georgiana, wife of the above, were dead and buried, and that Alexander, Bartholomew, Abraham, Tobias, and Roger, infant children of the aforesaid, were also dead and buried, and that the dark, flat wilderness beyond the church, intersected with dykes and mounds and gates, with scattered cattle feeding on it, was the marshes, and that the low leaden line behind was the river, and that the distant savage lair from which the wind was rushing was the sea, and that the small bundle of shivers growing afraid of it all and beginning to cry was Pip. "Hold your noise!" cried a terrible voice as a man started up from among the graves at the side of the church porch. "Keep still, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat." A fearful man, all in coarse grey, with a great iron on his leg, a man with no hat and with broken shoes and with an old rag tied around his head, a man who had been soaked in water and smothered in mud and lamed by stones and cut by flints and stung by nettles and torn by briars, who limped and shivered and glared and growled, and whose teeth chattered in his head as he seized me by the chin. "Oh, don't cut my throat, sir," I pleaded in terror. "Pray don't do it, sir." "Tell us your name," said the man. "Quick!" "Pip, sir." "Once more," said the man, staring at me. "Give it mouth." Pip, sir." "Show us where you live," said the man. "Point out the place." I pointed to where our village lay, on the flat inshore among the alder trees and pollards, a mile or more from the church. The man, after looking at me for a moment, turned me upside down and emptied my pockets. There was nothing in them but a piece of bread. When the church came to itself, for he was so sudden and strong that he made it go head over heels before me, and I saw the steeple under my feet. When the church came to itself, I say, I was seated on a high tombstone, trembling, while he ate the bread ravenously. Okay, so we've done our read through. Poor little Pip, alone on these bleak, desolate marshes set upon by this terrifying man, shackled and chained and damaged and bruised, who shouts at him and roughs him up. So the question that we're being asked is about tension. So basically, when you get a question on tension, you're looking for moments where, you know, the reader is gripped, the reader is nervous for the character or on the edge of their seats. It's that, oh gosh, feeling. That's what tension is. So as we now go back through it, we're going to be using spite to try and identify useful passages. So you'll probably have noticed that the first chunk, you know, really this huge paragraph that is just pretty much one long complex sentence, okay, yes, separated out into clauses and separated out by semicolons, but it is one long sentence, and it's very, very dense, but you're probably already starting to pick up ideas about tone and setting. So if we have a little look at some of the descriptions, so it's described as a bleak place overgrown with nettles. So, I mean, this works for both tone and setting, and you'll find that they do interlink. So for me, that feels really bleak, that feels oppressive, that feels very, very gloomy. The setting feels desolate and isolated, a horrible place for a young boy to be. The tone is also sort of very, very gloomy because of some of the content. It's not just the setting, but it's the listing of all of those people that are dead. And then, you know, we've got these phrases, dead and buried, adjectival phrases, dead and buried, repeated. So we've got this very kind of gloomy, depressing tone that's then mirrored in the setting. Look at the language as well. So we've got this rushing wind, so a bit of pathetic fallacy, you know, when the weather represents the mood. We've got this incredible metaphor describing the sea, the distant savage lair. So that sounds really sort of predatory and dangerous. So all of these things are hints and clues pointing to something dark or menacing or dangerous, and therefore creates tension. We also have people, yeah, characters, too, in this little moment, because the first thing that we hear of is that there is this small bundle of shivers growing afraid and beginning to cry, and that's Pip. So we know that this young lad, even before anything has happened, is frightened and scared and upset, sitting around in this place where all of his family members are dead. And then we have this as our first sort of major event, which is suddenly a man starting up from among the graves. So he just appears out of nowhere. So that builds tension because it's a shock. And it's not just the suddenness of his appearance, it's actually how he shouts. So it's described as being a terrible voice. We've got this exclamative and imperative, hold your noise. So telling him to be quiet. And then this very violent, aggressive language, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat. So immediately, yeah, this event is definitely creating tension. If you carry on going through, now, you know, there's more opportunity for us to talk about characterization for people, because look at this detailed description of this man. Okay, so it starts off, look at the way that it begins. A fearful man. Note the way that it's a fragmented sentence as well, almost like it's just these sort of thoughts rushing through Pip's head as he views all of these strange oddities about the character. He's in coarse grey, he's got a great iron on his leg, i.e. he's shackled, so he's escaped from prison. Look at the way that a man is repeated at the beginning of these clauses. A fearful man, a man with no hat, a man who'd been soaked in water. And then look at this listing: soaked in water, smothered in mud, lamed by stones, cut by flints, stung by nettles, and torn by briars. So you've got this incredible synthetic listing, lots of and, demonstrating to us the hardships and the suffering that he's been through escaping. Now, how does that create tension? Will we be worried? Is he desperate? So therefore, is he likely to harm Pip? That's what kind of keeps us on the edge of our seats. The dialogue creates a really aggressive tone. You know, you've got the sense of Pip's fear, I pleaded in terror, but look at how quickly, look at how the pace builds in this very kind of aggressive moment. And again, you've got the man constantly using imperatives and written with exclamation marks, suggesting that he's shouting at poor Pip. And then finally, the last event, which is when, although it's described very strangely, isn't it? Because it's from Pip's perspective, after looking at me for a moment, turned me upside down and emptied my pockets. But then you get this sort of his distorted view of the church steeple from being head over. So the fact that he flings them upside down and gives him a shake to empty his pockets, this is an event. And of course, again, the reader is going to think, oh my goodness, is Pip going to be hurt? Is he going to be damaged? What's this man going to do? All of these things are creating tension. So as you're doing your read through, hopefully if you've got spite in your mind, you can literally just do as I've done. It's not massive annotation, is it? And you don't even need to write the whole thing. You could just put PTE. That's fine. But it just gives you that signpost of where to look. Okay, so we've got the content, annotated, and we know that we've got to use evaluative words and language. So the next thing to ask ourselves is, well, how do you make sure that your paragraphs are without doubt evaluative rather than your just standard PEA paragraph? So I shall introduce you to another acronym, final one, I promise you, and that is GEDGE, okay? So the GEDGE paragraph is as such: judgment. So this is a topic sentence, but what makes it a judgment topic sentence is you use one of your Pecks. Okay, so powerful, effective, compelling, successful. Then easy, evidence. Yeah, that's obviously what's going to come next because you've got to back up the judgment. Okay, so if you're saying that what's really effective about the beginning of the passage is the way that setting has been used to create an ominous and menacing tone, then you need to put a quote in that demonstrates that setting. So evidence. And then justification. Why? Why is that effective? What is it about the quotation that demonstrates it? So it's the why part of the paragraph. Now, some of my students always say, so should I be talking about metaphors and similes there? You can, but you're not bound by them. It's not like in question 3 where if you don't hit language and structure, you get capped. The whole point of this is it's about covering range. So if there is a metaphor that you think is one of the reasons why something is effective, then by all means talk about it, but you don't have to. The other little thing that I would just say here, just as an FYI, I think the Pecks are really quite useful. And there are other adjectives that you can use or adverbs you can use, and feel free to get out a thesaurus and have a little look. But be careful about going over the top. No one wants to read that Dickens has been victorious in his word choices because it sounds facetious. It sounds like you're taking the mick. So keep it simple. Okay, so that was the question that we're dealing with. Now we're going to have a little look at a very quick model paragraph. Okay. Here we go. Charles Dickens builds tension effectively early in the extract through creating a glooming and menacing tone. So notice, here is my Pecks word, but I've also been specific. It's linked to spite, but gloomy and menacing. I'm not just saying he builds tension through tone or through setting. I'm being very specific as to what type of tone, what type of setting. The extract is set in a bleak place overgrown with nettles, and Dickens repeats the phrase dead and buried in relation to a number of Pip's family members. This is a compelling way to open. Okay, so notice, sorry, just to stop mid-sentence, but notice how I've just embedded my evidence there, and I've used 2 bits of evidence, okay, because I'm focusing on this kind of idea of this miserable tone. So more than one is fine, as long as the quotes aren't too long. So I'm now in my justification. And so I'm using another one of my Pecks words because I'm making double sure. Yeah, this is definitely evaluative. This is a compelling way to open, as the reader will feel on edge and nervous for Pip, who appears to be alone in a potentially dangerous place, perhaps foreshadowing the events to come. This is further emphasised by the pathetic fallacy created in the descriptions of the rushing wind and the phrase dark, flat wilderness to present the marshes. The fact that a young boy is on his own in this environment creates a tense beginning for the reader. Okay, so it's really straightforward. It's not, it's actually quite easy to do. You've just got to make sure that you're confident and have that range, which is where using Spite should help you. So, have a try. Go back to the earlier parts of the video, find some quotations that you want to talk about that are related to Spite, and have a little go at writing some paragraphs like this. Hand them into your teacher, get a little bit of feedback, or if you've got any questions, do just pop them in the comments and I will do my best to answer you. And so that's pretty much it for me, guys. I'm just going to say thank you so much for watching. I hope that was helpful and has solved any of your question 4 queries. There is another video doing a deep dive on question 3 that you might like to have a look at, and there is a walk and talk through a whole paper, which will just give you a really nice overview of everything that you need to do in this section. If you've not subscribed, go on, click that button, because you will get notifications of when more videos that are relevant to your GCSEs come up, as well as lots of other useful spelling, punctuation and grammar videos too to help. All right, thank you so much again. Happy revising.